All right. Good morning. Good afternoon. We're ready to go here. Welcome to this edition of Tech Talk with Zyxel. My name is Tri Nguyen. I am one of the product managers here and the sales manager for North America. I don't have my video turned on today. I couldn't get it working from a remote kind of standpoint because I am remote from home like I have been since March, and we've been here. We'll probably be here indefinitely at the time until further notice. But if you can If you have any questions throughout the entire process or the entire presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A section or the chat box. I have those open up. But today we're going to talk about a couple of new switches that have now access to our Nebula Cloud. Maybe by a raise of hands, how many of you currently are using Nebula in your deployments now, or maybe even heard of Nebula? Okay, thank you, Doug. Thank you for doing that. Josh, Jay. All right. Hopefully that's been something, and we've just hit some great milestones with Nebula, and so we know that's the way of the future. And there are a bunch of opportunities. Of course, you as a partner of ours, or maybe looking at becoming a partner, it's definitely a vehicle that allows for you to gain access to a lot of the managed services kind of opportunities, recurring revenue in that area, but really giving you a platform to manage and deploy very easily these kinds of products. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Like usual, I like to introduce you to Zyxel. We are Zyxel Networks. Which is the channel side of the business. We do have our telecom like business sector that still does Zyxel Communications. So Zyxel Networks is part of Zyxel. 30 years of networking expertise since 1989. 100 million devices creating connections globally, 600 employees in the Zyxel Networks arm, 700,000 businesses use Zyxel solutions in 150 different markets. So we've been around a while. We've got a lot of products. We've been internationally recognized for our innovation and design. Awards through CES throughout the different countries, innovative awards, things like that. So we pride ourselves in that because of what we can do with our system, with our team in R&D and everything. We have 20 years of certification through ICSA labs for our security appliances. And so we're one of just a few vendors. I think there's only 5 vendors who actually have this distinction and have this recognition of being at least 20 years straight certified, meaning that our security products are, interoperable with other products that are also ICSA certified. And what we say works in terms of firewall, in terms of security is verified. We pride ourselves in bringing you solutions. We work with our partners. We work with people like you in developing products and solutions and kind of helping you helping us to understand what your needs are and what your customer needs are. And because we do a lot of the software and the hardware design in our R&D facilities, we're able to deliver solutions that that really work around what you're planning on doing in different vertical markets and giving you an end-to-end ecosystem of what products to use. So end to end, we have network delivery of a really comprehensive portfolio, security appliances, wireless solutions, Ethernet switching, we'll talk about today, gateway solutions for hotspots and network access, and using that in different ways to manage it in the network, whether it be cloud or standalone. And today we'll just highlight both the standalone options, but really the key is getting to the Nebula Cloud. So let's jump right into the switches that are in play. The GS1300 series is our surveillance switch. It specializes in that. There's a lot of need for those IoT devices that need PoE, especially security. Surveillance is one of those major driving forces of pushing this kind of switch need. There's a lot of IP camera vendors out there that provide a total solution, but the switches themselves lack some of the switch expertise, some of the switch features that today's convergent networks need. You're applying both voice, video, the surveillance, and the data all on that same platform a lot of times to either do cost savings or just to provide some additional services on the existing network. So a lot of those vendors that are providing the cameras are really the switches are really just there to power up the cameras themselves and don't usually offer any kind of advanced security feature sets or some of these other feature functionalities that you'll find in the surveillance switch. So some of the challenges in CCTV have been the need for lower budget, kind of low cost switches to provide that. That's what's actually in the market today. There's a lot of cost if you want to extend your existing networks that you have to deal with. Sometimes it's pretty costly, time consuming to get like IP cameras up and going, or when you have to recover a specific IP camera. So that's a big challenge that when we talk to our CCTV partners, these are some of the challenges that they have dealt with. Out of date CCTV networks, so not even running IP, but needing to get to an IP format so they can have high definition, high throughput connectivity. Those networks are typically prone to surge and electrostatic discharge as well. And of course, the feature set's inconsistent. So depending on which kind of switches you are looking for, the cameras are maybe different. Even the POV or even the power capabilities of the IP cameras can be different. So we look to ways to kind of standardize on that. A lot of the industry is already standardizing on the POE capabilities, but there are still challenges on how to implement that in a network that needs maybe Wi-Fi class group access or client access hotspots, plus like the data network. So there's a lot of kind of piggybacking on those networks that are coming into play. So this switch allows for us to give you as a CCTV. Now it's not just CCTV, it could be used for other things as well, but there's some specific applications and specific features that are geared towards the CCTV specifically. Zyxel has a large PoE budget for the port count that's typically there. If you look into the open market now, a lot of the switches that are out there, they're primarily made for voice, meaning that a lot of the phones, the handsets, only consume very small amounts of wattage power. So the power budgets are typically smaller on those switches, and they typically cost a lot less, right? Because of the lower power, lower output. But a lot of the cameras that we're dealing with, it's the opposite range. They're needing more power. So you're getting this kind of ebb and flow, this tug of war between people who deploy voice, who don't need that much power and just need a budget PoE switch, versus people who are deploying cameras who can't find enough power, or they're going to have to pay, some absorbent amount of, on top of that to get the PoE output power budget that they need. So ours offer a very large power budget for the port count so that it can come into play, make sure that there's plenty of power across the board for all the ports. And also we give some visual indicators that help you, because PoE is important in these kinds of applications. It can tell you what is the max consumptions, or maybe the current consumption usage of that port. So we have some LED displays that will indicate that as well. Now our switches also have what we call extended range. It offers the capability to extend PoE and the data to up to 250 meters. Now you may know that existing, maybe current standard PoE only goes up to 100 meters. So 2.5 times longer, which in these cases for cameras, it becomes a pretty powerful thing to use, because now you don't need a little extender in between. You don't need to have an injector or a relay in between, but you can just go all the way 250 meters. That's 800 so feet of distance on existing Ethernet cable, and be able to still do it, not only provide power, but also data. Now, just keep in mind, though, the data is a little bit degraded. So it's down to, I think, 10 megabits per second. But a lot of if you're needing to go that far and you don't want to have to run the cabling, it's still enough to run your cameras at a high quality. And of course, on the 1350, all of the PoE ports support this extended range mode. We do have an unmanaged one that does not go to the cloud. It's just an unmanaged switch, the 1300 series. Since they don't have a management interface, you have to use kind of a dip switch model to toggle which ports get the extended range mode. But in the 1350s, you can manage that not only in its standalone mode, but also within the cloud in Nebula. Of course, you also need uplink ports, since you are either extending the network to cascade surveillance networks, to expand existing networks, or even maybe tie into an existing networks to get uplinks, right, without having to sacrifice the ports that are being used for the cameras themselves. So that's where the 1350 comes into play, both web managed version and also a non-managed version if you are looking for a budget, but it's suitable for CCTV installations of kind of different ranges and different sizes, anywhere from, the 5, 8, 4 cameras all the way up to 24 different cameras into a single switch. Now they have some specialized software that we've designed. We've worked with our partners to come up with some things. Again, part of their challenge is, right, to bring these features to play. Auto camera recovery, it's able to detect, recover failed IP cameras. So it can see that a camera is not functioning for some reason, it's not sending traffic, and through LLDP detection or through IP pinging, everything like that, and it can actually power the devices down automatically. So based on certain criteria, and I'll show you an example of that, it can do a power reboot. So it may save you a lot of time. A lot of the installations or the issues and people troubleshoot have been, just a go out there, unplug the device, plug it back in, and now you're backing up and going. So this can help with a lot of truck rolls and things like that. Now, continuous PoE feature allows for the cameras to stay on all the time, even when the switch goes through a reboot from maybe configuration or maybe a firmware upgrade. We still have a power bypass that allows for that PoE to continue on the cameras so that the cameras themselves do not reboot. So that helps a lot in terms of keeping the uptime as much as possible. And of course, our hardware design, again, we've designed a lot of this, the hardware itself, so we take that into account. We have a patented and Ethernet protection on each of the ports to protect the switch from both lightning and surge protection. So this is kind of the range that we have, down from the low end 6 HP all the way to the 26 HP, which are the Smart Managed Nebula Flex Pro switches and the different wattage budgets. So on a 24 port, Max 3775, but the interesting ones that we didn't have in our current GS1920 series products is this switch comes with like a 5-port PoE, a 16-port PoE, which is the configurations that a lot of camera deployments typically use. Of course, we still have the 8 and the 24, but now there's the lower end if you're just having to deploy a few switches to the 16-port count that we never had in the 1920 series. And of course, we have the unmanaged versions as well, 8, 16, and 24 ports. But really, the interesting one is the Nebula Flex Pro type switches, because it does have some things like surveillance mode, Nebula Flex Pro, the on-if discovery, so IP discovery of the device, PoE management for the surveillance, and a lot of the CLI, web, or Nebula software features that you have there. It also has a pretty wide temperature range from -20 to 50 degrees Celsius. And of course, you get the extended range. So typical max of range Ethernet is 100 meters, like I mentioned before. So 300 feet on your Cat5, Cat6 cabling. But of course, there's always that chance where you have that one camera, and so you might have to buy some sort of extender, and that extender could be, pretty costly at times just to get it to go an existing, to go to an additional few feet. But now with the hardware, we have extended power and data that is sent on your existing Cat5 to that camera. So it could be very cost effective in order to get to that reach. And it also increases, the reach of all, maybe of your deployments, so that you don't necessarily have to go a second switch down, down on the other side of the building that gets, gets uplinked. But you can still do that if you need to, but there's typically just 1 or 2 cameras that always has that need, that it's going just a little too far from your traditional Ethernet range. So you toggle the ability to go extended range, and now you're good to go. So this is just how it works. Your traditional setup, you had to have those in-between PoE switches or extenders or relays in order to go that 250 meters. But this now allows for you to do that. We've also interop tested a bunch of different brands, up to 15 brands right now, of IP cameras that work with the extended range. And so we've included some information on that. We have a test report that lists all of the different brands and the specific cameras that we've tested. Brands like Axis, Bosch, Panasonic, Hikvision, Sony, those kind of cameras that you are probably typically using now that are big in the industry. But we have those available. If you want to contact our sales rep, we can get that to them and to you, and we'll provide that test report. It's really helpful to find one thing about extended range. If your cameras do have the little pigtails, some of those cameras have like a universal pigtail where there's like every connector possible known to mankind, like connected to it. Those ones can tend, or maybe are the more the ones that are likely to be less interoperable, or maybe have some issues with using extended range, typically because of the quality of those PoE converter things are not so great. So just watch out for that, and that could be part of the issue. So typically then the distance you would have to go probably has to be lowered than your full 250 meters. But if everything is clean, 250 meters is where this technology goes. It also has the lightning surge protection that could potentially, disable these kinds of networks. So we have surge protection on the switch to help with that. Again, it's a patented Ethernet protection to protect it from that. So it really helps with the cost. And of course, we also design robust hardware in that. We have stabilized power, filter different noise. We have power surge in a certain protector, for the power supply, surge protection. We have isolated circuits designed, again, for surge protection. Also hardware design that allows for us to give you a lifetime warranty on these products. So these are kind of the differences between the web managed version and the unmanaged version. You can see that the web managed version is a lot more in terms of the surge protection and the electrostatic discharge on each one of the ports. So some of the features here generally will be available in the 1920s in the bottom box there. The remote reboot IP cameras, we're adding that feature into our 1920s features. Granular control, scheduling the PoE priority. But in the surveillance switch, there are those specific features at the top. In the surveillance mode specifically, info on the IP camera information, auto camera recovery, and also uninterrupted power. Those features at the top, the first four, are not available in your typical 1920 series, or even in the market, your typical product. So this switch is tailor-made for surveillance because we've redesigned the interface as well. In standalone mode, you can choose between your standard switch mode, or you can choose CCTV feature mode. So there's a surveillance mode when you log in for the first time. Basically, you can choose that, and what it does is it minimizes kind of the interface down to the things that you typically would need for surveillance. You can always switch back to the standard mode by itself, but this just kind of narrows down the views so that it helps you to to deploy them very quickly, or do a quick, learn. The learning curve on it's pretty easy for you to be able to get your hands on how to deploy in surveillance. So in surveillance mode, you can go through quick mode. It just asks you how to set up ports, PoE, how are you using it, has some online information that can help you to enable some of those key features that you would use for a surveillance switch, like extended range, auto camera recovery, things like that. So you can then go through these wizards, do that quick setup, and get that information going. In surveillance mode, again, it gives you also a summary, so a camera summary information. So it tells you what devices that are there, how much power is being used, and also the health of the device, whether it detects it with green, or maybe there's some issue, maybe it's losing ping or whatever it is, it may show yellow. But it's all about monitoring information that's key to monitoring your IP cameras. And of course, on the right side there, you can also reboot things and switch things to default and things like that. Of course, when a camera disconnects, a lot of times you just get a black screen, right? And that's kind of the number one issue, troubleshooting, where somebody may call you and say, hey, one of the cameras out. Now, unfortunately, if you don't have any kind of remote access or remote management, you have no way to kind of determine or maybe do some initial troubleshooting. You can't tell the customer to go unplug things and plug them back in, because that will risk them doing something that may cause, different kinds of issues in the network. So in order to do that, it just requires typically somebody to go on site and take a look at things, maybe check some information, or even as simple as the very first thing people do is to just reboot it. So with auto camera recovery, it has the capability and the intelligence to actually detect those issues and automatically try to recover the camera. Meaning that it will try to reboot, and it will also look at ways until how long it sits there on the reboot to ensure that the camera's back before it before it does anything further. And this really can shorten the time. Sometimes what we found out is when the switch automatically reboots the camera for them, within a minute or so, however long it takes for the camera to come back online, the problem just is there's no longer a problem. So from a troubleshooting standpoint, it may not even show up. People may not even realize that it's down. Rusty has a question. Any issues or consideration using and configuring other devices like APs on this? There's no issue to use APs. Actually, one of our partners used this, even with auto camera recovery feature on our access points. So using these switches to deploy, again, because of the higher power for the 16 port, they're able to deploy access points using the switch as well. So even though, we call this a CCTV a specific switch because it has specific features for it, it can still be used as a standalone. And so there's no real issues on that. Now you can take great advantage of the camera recovery, because I'll show you what it does. Basically what it does is there's two options, a ping mode and LLDP. Now the ping mode just puts starts pinging the camera, looks for, no response, and then takes some action. LLDP looks at the actual LLDP packets themselves from the camera and then makes that decision whether or not it's up or down. And then you have some granular variables that you can customize each one to make sure that there is a kind of a speedy recovery. And this is what I mean for that. Again, this is why we call this, specifically designed for IP surveillance. You can put the IP address in it. That works obviously for all cameras, or you can do IP cam, detect the IP cam automatically via LLDP if the camera itself has that capability to do link layer discovery. And you can set these very specific configurations, like reboot after it pulls for 600 seconds, or when it's down, it will do the reboot and it will resume polling after 600 seconds. So after 10 minutes, it may then check again, because it's allowing for the device to do its reboot, anything else that it needs to be done, and then come back and keep on checking. It also has a PD reboot count, so you can set that up. So if you may not want to just continually reboot it every 10 minutes, and it's it really is dead, or really has something issues not coming back online, but at least you can try maybe 2 or 3 times to see if it will come back online. And if not, then that's when you roll the truck to go out there and see what's going on. The resume power interval, it's kind of a creative way. How when we reboot anything, you want to wait sometimes 10 seconds for all of the capacitors and things to discharge, right? In a PoE switch, and a lot of the other vendors too, is if you just do the reboot, it just power cycles them and just puts it back online, which could cause, different issues if there's still, power in the device itself. So what we do is we set the threshold. So we basically, we're simulating a power cycle. We unplug the device from the PoE, digitally or virtually, right? And then we wait 10 seconds and then push back the power. And so that just allows for that same kind of activity. So why is surveillance network is always outdated? Well, PoE switches usually, there's issues where switches will stop supplying power to the cameras when you're doing typically firmware upgrades, when you reboot, or when you do a configuration update. And so that takes time for those cameras to go back live again, because you've cut their power. So depending on how long it takes cameras to come on, will be kind of your uptime, as well as the switch time to coming back online. So this can happen during maintenance and things like that. So that's your typical PoE switch. But what we've done is we've offered a PoE switch solution that is continuous, meaning that, well, as long as I had a customer who asked me what if the switch loses power? Will it still maintain power? And that's an obvious no. If the switch itself can't even get power, then there's no way for us to supply power to these cameras. But if the switch itself is just either going through a reboot or a firmware update reboot, things like that, or configuration reboot, which is pretty rare, then the cameras will still maintain their power, and it prevents the video loss. So, and it also prevents any kind of IP changes as well, if there's those cameras on an IP, DHCP thing. It also minimizes maintenance time because you don't have to be down as long. So it doesn't have to wait for the switch to come back online then offer power to the devices, and then all those devices finally come up. The devices are the cameras are already up, and so we can just the time that the switch has to get to a working state is the time that it starts to pass traffic. So that remains, the cameras will remain operational when we're loading configurations, even when we return the device to factory defaults, if we're maintaining it, if we're upgrading the firmware, or if there's some sort of weird abnormality that that it reboots the switch, then it will still maintain that. And you can actually choose which ones can offer that as well. Now, the question comes into play, when do I go cloud? When do I stay standalone? It really depends on kind of your application and how you want to manage things. People and partners have different business scenarios, different business cases that they want to choose one or the other. The Nebula Cloud offers you something that can helps you to mass manage, mass configure, and monitor information anywhere. Now, if you've already been an established kind of managed service provider who already has a system in place, either SNMP, things like that, you may have scripts and things like that that already help you with that monitoring information. And so that may be where you choose to go with the standalone version. But a lot of customers are actually looking for kind of a cloud-based solution so that they can do auto provisioning, they can do more of the group management of your customers and get that visibility across the board anytime. Of course, you always can do that with your standalone, but that also it requires you to have investment in a server or paying software licenses for those kinds of monitoring tools. Now, you can register it in standalone, just keep it unregistered from NCC, which is Nebula Control Center. And you can then switch it actually into Flex mode if you like to use them in the Nebula Cloud. Now, we do offer Nebula Flex as a free option as well. But just to let you know, they're GS1350s. When you use it in and register for the Nebula Cloud, if you already have one today, it actually includes 1 year of Nebula Flex Pro. So that means you'll have the Pro license that allows for you to manage and use all of the features that are available to the GS1350 and Nebula. You can manage all that, including some key kind of professional features that are available. So you do have the flexibility on this hybrid switch now to use both in standalone or in Nebula Cloud. The cloud manageability is there without any additional hardware costs. You don't have to put another server in. You don't have to put a cloud key. You don't have to put anything within those networks, but you can manage all these devices in the cloud with ease. It includes the 1 year professional pack, like I mentioned, just when you register the device. So that includes features like the surveillance monitoring, the auto PD recovery, the extended range, and those features we continue to add to the Nebula side of things. So that just gives you extra value on the product as you're using it throughout the year. And of course, it's future-proof because the technology, we're flexible to add functionalities, features into the cloud. So your investment is only kind of in the wiring itself. So this really is really helpful on moving into the cloud, and it gives you that flexibility. Maybe your customer today doesn't want maybe a managed type service, or maybe your business model doesn't support that currently, but you do have then the option to move to the cloud, to either for your customer's view or for your own benefit, your own view, because it has that centralized network management capabilities, multi-site management. So you have multiple customers all under a single pane of glass. So you have all of your different customers. They may have multiple sites that are there as well. So underneath that, each customer view, and you can get an overview of the entire organization. And then of course, you can drill down into everyone's site. You can do cross-site configuration, backup, and import. That allows for you to do things like cloning of sites. So let's say, imagine you deployed maybe a IP camera scenario or a Wi-Fi scenario for a typical office, and you have a switch, a gateway, an access point, and those are powering up a camera or maybe connect to a camera network. You can cookie cutter that and get that optimized, and then be able to clone that site to another new customer that comes with a similar deployment. And so, or even if maybe the customer or the retailer has multiple sites that are fairly identical, You might be doing a restaurant chain or something like that, that you can just clone the site and be able to push similar configurations, everything to those devices without having to spend too much time reconfiguring everything again. You get email alerts for critical network events. Again, it's a monitoring tool, a visibility tool. The surveillance mode can give you that site-wide view within the Nebula Cloud. The features that are specialized for IP surveillance, like extended range, auto camera recovery, continuous PoE, that's available in the Pro as well. Or you can just use it in a standalone mode. And then the site summary, you can give, this is where it really adds value to the cloud part of it. It provides you historical data, data usage information within the cloud that you can run reports weekly, sort of monthly reports that can be customized, that you can use to send to your customers. So not only from a security standpoint, from just a usability standpoint, how much bandwidth's being used, uptime information, that can all be sent to the customer to kind of provide, what you've been doing, how their network's been protected or secured, for that month. So that really gives some great value in that. And then also we guarantee availability in Nebula. So even if your Pro license, that 1 year that you got expires, we move you to basically the Nebula free cloud portion of it. So you're able to monitor still, configure the switches. There's just certain functions that are part of the Pro Pack, like surveillance monitoring, auto PD recovery, and extended range, which is no longer like configurable, but it will still be working at that point, but you just won't be able to access those if you need to make changes. So this requires then you just renew the license to continue the access. Now, something we also offer uniquely as well in the Nebula Cloud is a lifetime license, meaning that you can activate a license that gives you full Nebula Pro access for that organization, for the devices within that organization, for life, basically for the life of Nebula. And so you can do that, and it's really a cost savings, especially if you're doing a managed service. That's just your CapEx. You just have that initial investment for that site, and now you can just charge that monthly and recoup that over time. But the cool thing is too, is even if technology changes, if we do have new switches that come out that you want to deploy within that site, they can take those seats. So those lifetime seats are just, node seats, no matter what the technology, hardware, or whichever hardware model portfolio is in there. So if we come out with a better switch, a 10 gig switch version of this or something like that, you can just swap out and you don't have to pay that additional, any additional licenses for the Nebula Cloud access, and it'll still be Pro. That also works, just as a hint too, it works for access points. So if you're looking at moving to, you're still having on 11AC right now, if you go to a lifetime license, once your customer wants to go to an upgrade to Wi-Fi 6, you can then just swap out the hardware for that in that same license seat. All right, so some things that you want to know before, just for the 1350 specifically, is that you want to be on the latest firmware. Just right now, because there's before, the older firmware didn't have kind of the ability to discover the Nebula Cloud or maybe the Nebula information. So you actually have to kind of go in and enable that in the local GUI right now. The future devices, they'll have an automatic capability with the proper firmware that's on there. But if you have to load the firmware, you'll have to kind of go through these steps to kind of enable the Nebula Control Center discovery so that can make it active. So before you do any kind of comparisons from a switch standpoint of this switches with any of our competitors, just know that there are some specific things that are very specific for surveillance that the other vendors do not have. A lot of the mainstream brands, Netgear, HP, Cisco, they don't have these kinds of solutions for these requirements. Higher PoE power budgets in that price range, extended range support for the Ethernet cabling, 8 ports, 16 port, 24 ports, both managed and unmanaged versions, and in the cloud. And of course, a lot of those other switches do not even have uplink ports. So you have to use, just keep that in mind when you're comparing. Also, different switches, different camera vendors. We do have a lineup of high power PoE switches, but obviously there's a lot of different cameras that are out there that could be interoperable. Just be careful for lower cost designs, like ones that have fast Ethernet switches, maybe not even have any kind of indicators for PoE usage. Some of the ones that make the cameras themselves don't have some of these features. So just as you're using, if you're using the ones that come from the camera vendors, just know that they may not have some of the even simple security features that we offer in our switches itself, especially for having to deal with video and data and the camera network at the same time. So that was the 1350. So now we have actually our 2220 series switch. So this is our one of our most popular switches that we have for our partners that have been sold. And it's really designed for the full layer 2 capabilities that, you know, with CLI, it's kind of a multiple capable switch. Dave just has a question. Do we buy those Nebula Pro licenses through distribution or direct? It goes through distribution just like anything else. We have license keys that you can purchase through distribution. Now we do have a direct method too that can facilitate things, but we have everybody go through distribution there, Dave. As you know, there are a lot of different things that you want to be able to protect against within the network. Loop guard, IP source guard. If your network is prone to have potentially different types of network attacks, then this is the switch that we want to go with. So if you've ever used a GS2220 series, this is the 2220, the successor for that. It's kind of the successor, but not. I mean, we do have the 2220 coming out, but what it does is it does have the Nebula Cloud included. Primarily from a pure functionality standpoint, the GS2210 is pretty much the same, except we are adding features within the Nebula Cloud portion of it that is very specific to the 2220 that is not going to be available in the 2210. But that cloud management capability in the Nebula is included within every GS2220 that you purchase. We also changed some of the dimensions of the PoE models to make it smaller and maybe shallower, so they're not as deep. And then also has additional memory in case we need to use it for kind of future expansions or better feature sets. So this is just the 2220 at a glance. Again, it comes with a 1-year bundle. You have your layer 2 multicast, your snooping, IGMP. So really it's a higher end switch that lets you do more complex scenarios, have a voice VLAN, if you have an MVR, again, just multiple things kind of come into play. You're doing voice, you're doing video, you're doing data, you're doing maybe IP surveillance on top of that too, but really Wi-Fi, being able to offer high power PoE on that. It uses by default consumption mode that just maximizes the power budget that you have available to power up more devices, and also indicators now in these devices, so power usage information. It also has a smart fan design that maybe the 2210s do not currently, and really offer a very low quiet operation. So if you want to compare some of the DBM information or DBI information, DBM information, just check that out on our data sheets. And you can check the real-time status if it's in the cloud or not, even with the PoE and the LEDs that are available on these switches. So we just designed that, making them flexible. We have combo ports that are in some of these models. Just keep in mind that the one big difference is on our 48 port switches. They have 50 ports instead of the 52 because of the different uplink kind of configuration that we have. We still have the 48 ports that you can use, but then just a few less uplink ports. I think our current GS2210 series they're all 52 and 52 HP. So just keep that in mind. So this is the industry's first tri-mode switch. So it's not only a layer 2, layer 3 CLI capable, cloud managed, and also SNMP manageable switch. So depending on what you need, this can be available to that. Now, using it in the cloud, you get a whole a slew of things, including network topology overview information. It can detect what devices are connected to all these ports as well. Ability to manage multiple networks on multiple customers because it's in the Nebula Cloud. And we have something special for this switch as well called IPTV report, and we'll talk about that. So again, which to use, it really is up to you and your management style. But we are seeing customers migrating to the Nebula Cloud very quickly because of the information, the management capabilities, and be able to do that anytime and anywhere. So here are some of the difference between standalone mode and using Nebula Flex with this switch. It gives you, again, site-wide information, some visualized support. It has L2, all the L2 functions, the Nebula L2 functions. It may not be the comprehensive complete L2 that you have from the standalone mode, but we are working on adding as much as we can to the Nebula Flex side of things. And so it's just a matter of adding those features, but we have majority of everything you would ever need into the Nebula Flex. Kind of the philosophy of Nebula and Nebula Flex is to make things easier. So making things more simplified for you as you're doing deployments and configurations and to do troubleshooting. We do have Cisco command line interfacing as well, capable in the standalone, but of course, when you're using Nebula, it's all web interfaced information. We have things like zero-touch provisioning for the switch, centralized network management, of course, set up backup configuration templates for hundreds of sites. So you can do auto backup, dated backups, time backups, things like that for these switches to kind of preserve their configurations. You can clone them using the Flex Pro, and of course, email alerts information for critical network events. Now for IPTV, I know in the first set of switches, we were talking about CCTV, but now here on this switch, we're talking about also IPTV. Now IPTV functionalities we've added, and also a report for advanced IGMP. You can get instant setup information for IPTV for the entire network of that switch. You can also look for information that may help you to troubleshoot long pauses between changing of IPTVs, maybe freezes, pixelations, when you're switching channels, delays, things like that, better utilization, and then get information for better utilization through the IPTV report. Let's see, Josh has a question. Can you still use CLI in Nebula mode to configure settings not currently supported? Yes, and that answers yes there, Josh. If there are certain features, we typically go to the CLI to make those special changes, but a lot of times that's just kind of a band-aid before we get the feature added to the Nebula side. So the Nebula IPTV report gives you a view of your IPTV usage. So you'll see what kind of channels that are there, channels that are currently in use, how many users are part of those channels, and give you a summary, maybe the popularity of the channels like over the last 30 days, and filter that information out. Again, because it's in the cloud, it has all of this data, and it also can see viewers' details for each channel watched. And this is kind of what we worked with some IPTV vendors and also hotel customers and things who want this kind of information so that they can go back and see, maybe which kind of plans or packages to negotiate with their content provider. But again, just to see even the utilization of it. Is it worth it? Are these channels worth it? Whatever it is. And again, be able to give them information and also to be able to troubleshoot. Maybe one of the channels is not working correctly, and you have information on that. You also can check all of the bandwidth management in that environment as well, and be able to look at and reduce. There's some features in here that will automatically kind of using like a semi AI to kind of help with the topology, help with the traffic usage, and make sure that it's running as efficient as possible. You have detailed attributes, things that leave mode, group filtering configurations, aggregator and access, and information like that. It supports also intelligent PoE. All of our devices have that PoE consumption mode. This one has also a PoE max indicator, so it tells you real time what the usage is. It's defaulted in consumption mode, so it only takes from the budget what the device actually is consuming, what its actual draw. So that allows for you to multi-balance the existing power budget that's available. And of course, it provides 30 watts of power per port, or up to that amount. Of course, you're still limited by the budget of the entire switch itself, but we have a budget of 180 watts to 375 watts for these switches. And our design, we put in a little bit of extra information, like for example, our 10 port has the PoE indicator there, as well as whether or not it is in the cloud. So you can tell if this switch is being managed in Nebula or not. Solid green just means that it's connected to the cloud and has good connectivity there. So that can kind of help with the troubleshooting if it's not part of the cloud. Also, you have a feature called Restore to Last Custom Default, which is really helpful for maybe partners who, when you go and do your installation in a standalone mode per se, cloud mode you don't have to worry about, but in standalone deployment, you can configure the device, basically take the image of it, which is that current configuration, and load it into the last custom default, which then when you push that button, or maybe your technician has to push that restore button, it goes back to that default rather than doing a complete factory default to the switch. It goes back to that known good, basically the one that you've saved. So that could save a lot of time in terms of a standalone kind of management if you're on a break fix. Of course, our switches are automatically, the fans are smart fanned. I know some people have always complained that, the switches can be really loud, and unless they're sitting in a rack mount, it's too loud to be kind of in the open network or in the office network. But here with our smart fans, the actual power output usages, or the sound output, the loudness, the noise is actually really, really low compared to any of the other vendors that are out there. We're one of the lowest, actually. So we're really efficient on how to manage the heat, yet manage the noise at the same time. And just like our other switch, we've designed for reliability. We use stronger protection for surge. We have a dedicated hardware monitor for the fan and also for the auto fan control. We have solid state capacitors and power noise filters to help with the power and the filtering of that, and making sure that the longevity of the device, that the capacitors themselves don't blow. And that's typically the reason why a lot of other vendors there, maybe lower cost switches are made so they only have like a 1-year warranty, maybe a 2-year warranty. But again, with our products, our business class models, we offer a lifetime warranty on the device. And we use world-class power supplies, making sure that we provide a clean, robust power to the device itself. So in standalone, we do a lot of hospitality. So this is just a quick example of what typical network could look like. If you're using a GS2220, you could uplink it back, to Ethernet, gigabit to a XGS, which then the XGS has 10 gig uplinks to other devices, maybe an NVR, or maybe to other monitoring information, or maybe storage backup, things like that before it goes out to the cloud. But really, the network allows for the devices are flexible that can, you can deploy in many different applications. Everything that you can power up, IPTVs, or even hospitality in the room, Wi-Fi access in room, as well as IP cameras, along the hallways and things like that. So really, again, separating the network, being able to auto provision it, and then now being able to use it within the cloud. And that could also be a very powerful thing. So even though this is like a standalone management information on these examples for, let's say, education here, you can use the Nebula version or Nebula options. Now, the cool thing is those access points, like our WAC 6303, the 5123, the 6303, all those access points are also Nebula Pro capable. So everything besides the USG there in this example, all of the devices on the link layer, the access layer, the 2220s and the access points can all be managed in Nebula. And that's typically your biggest amount of devices. In a school, you may have hundreds of access points, and maybe, tens of switches, right? And so you want to be able to manage that. You don't want to manage that in a standalone capability. You want that overall view. So with Nebula, the Pro package gives you that view of all those hundreds of devices under a single pane, tells you all and you can drill down into each one of those, even down to the access points, to see who's all associated to that particular access point. So that's really helpful to troubleshoot. Maybe if there's a digital textbook or an iPad, things like that are not connected, and you can figure out why. This is focused primarily on the switch side of things, but if you look at some of our, I encourage you to look at our Nebula training. We do very specific ones that include the access point information and what you can view within the access point. So you can see signal strength, you can see who's connected and what their signal strength is to that access point. So again, it will help you troubleshoot maybe poor coverage areas and take action from that. And of course, the switches themselves will have its capability to auto detect different devices that are plugged into itself and give you kind of a topology overview within the Nebula system as well. So cloud managed solution, really it can go to kind of any kind of application, of course, with our switches, our gateways, and our access points. And then all used in any kind of browser, even on a phone, on a tablet. Also, we have an app-based management tool as well that helps you to add devices and also to look at kind of the status of all those devices within Nebula. Now, of course, if you want a demo of Nebula, there is also an online demo. If you just want to see what the GUI interface looks like, just go to nebula.zyxel.com and you can log in with the posted account that's there to kind of take a test drive of what the interface looks like for Nebula as an example. But if you're looking at getting a Nebula device or capable device like our GS1350 or even a GS2220 to test out within the Nebula platform, reach out to your sales rep and to request a demo. We can send one out to you to play with and to be able to see if that will work for you. Of course, you have access to the free side of things, but we can enable the Pro Pack information. Now, if you are a partner, thank you very much for being a partner. I have to update this slide because we just introduced Bronze to now have a discount within the Bronze tier. But if you are a new partner that just signed up, you automatically go to the Silver tier, and you just have to maintain every 6 months a 6K sales of Zyxel products. But that gives you kind of a very good double-digit margin option through distribution that really helps for you to compete, and have the visible street price that you may see like online and things like that, and be able to still offer at a decent margin. Of course, though, we want you to get to the Gold tier because that gives you the maximum discount possible, and also gives you access to things like lead referrals that we can send to you, different access to their sales engineer, advanced replacement, and that's just a 12K. And most of our partners, one project, pretty much one or two projects, a quarter or even a half year can hit you to that 12K. So it's really not that big. You think about our gateways, even our firewalls, our UTM firewalls, those can be an $800 to $1,000 device that you deploy for one location. So that's already, a 12th of the way there. So a lot of our partners are taking advantage of that, our low kind of tier requirements, and go there. But there's no cost to sign up. So at least there's no, fees. There's no certification requirements. There's just that qualifying sales requirement right now. And of course, you can use all of our distributors, D&H, Ingram, Synnex, Wave, and Target Distribution to buying our products. Well, that was it. I went through a bunch of slides. It looks like 54 slides or so in 53 minutes, averaging 1 a minute. Hopefully that wasn't too fast for you, too much information for you to handle. But if you want to learn more about Nebula, like I said, we do have webinars that are specifically for the Nebula platform itself. So if you're not familiar with Nebula directly, I advise you to watch those webinars that we have posted on either YouTube, on Facebook, or also on our webpage itself at zyxel.com. So take a look at that. If you have any questions specifically, this is your time. So I want this to be interactive as much as possible. That's why we have these tech talks, so we can interact with you, give you opportunity to ask questions, information. Let's see, Dave asks, is there a contact email to help properly size gateways? When you mean contact email, like somebody to contact, typically if you just contact your sales rep, either at distribution or at Zyxel, they'll bridge in the right people. Our sales team are pretty knowledgeable about what kind of gateway sizes you should put into the network, but a lot of times it's dictated, Dave, by the WAN connectivity. Sometimes you just have to look at, we do have a product matrix that allows for you to look at and help you to decide based on some key factors. And usually right now, the key factor is, are they running UTM? Do they need to run, antivirus, intrusion detection, content filtering? That's the UTM platform. Do they need UTM? And what is their internet WAN speed? Now, if they're just doing content filtering, they don't care about the antivirus, they have some other solution for that, that's fine. And so there you can justify, or you can have a higher performance based on that. But usually you look at the data sheet, you look at their WAN connection. Let's say their WAN connection, they're bringing in a 300 meg connection, right? If they're not using UTM, you can just look at the SPI firewall throughput of the device, take about 50 to 60% of that number. So let's say the data sheet said, 1 gig, 1,000 megabits per second. So you would spec that be, perfectly fine for anything that's 500 to 600 megabits of WAN speed connectivity, right? So that's where you gauge down. It's always about 50 to 60% based on the off of the theoretical number. Now, if you said, hey, they also need UTM at 300 megs, then you have to take a look at the UTM throughput on the data sheet. So there's usually a UTM throughput that puts the AV and IDP, which is the most intensive gateway function, and look at that throughput, and also then take 50 to 60% of that. So if that says, 500, then you're more likely to be able to use UTM enabled for 250 to 300 megabits. So that would still fit into this particular example if they got a 300 meg connection. So that's really the gauge. Even if they had only 2 people there at the office, but they had a 300 meg connection, you still have to scale the firewall or the gateway properly in order to meet that, unless they don't want to pay for the security level. And if they want to sacrifice some security for a higher throughput at a lower cost, then they can do that as well. But it just, you could probably give them a good, better, best option with what we provide. All right, Josh also asked, when swapping back to standalone mode, is there any way to back up the config so it can be loaded after the factory reset? I have to check with our team. Typically, you don't switch it back and forth necessarily like that from standalone to Nebula. There are some things that do stay within that if you don't have to factory reset it, if you don't factory reset it. So there are some configurations that will already still be there. But I will check. Typically, like I said, once you have it in, what we found out is once you've used it in the Nebula mode, if you want to take it out of Nebula mode and put it into a standalone mode, typically it's because you've removed the device from that network and you're putting it to another customer, and you're wanting just to factory reset it anyways and reconfigure. But even if you factory reset and you want to put it back on the Nebula Cloud to another customer, you can unregister it from a particular customer in the Nebula side, and then re-register it to another customer. And if you have the cloning capabilities, then you can also clone the configurations to that new device on the cloud, and be able to make the minor tweaks, minor changes to get it up and going. All right. Well, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address, that's try@zyxel.com. 3 letters at zyxel.com. There you go. So now you can remember that easier too. Try is also 3. So tri@zyxel.com. Whoops. Well, thank you again for spending this last hour with me, and also thinking about Zyxel and the solutions that we're providing to you. And thank you for your partnership. If you are a partner, again, if you're not a partner, feel free to reach out to us and get you signed up again for free, and get you some of those discounts that you can take advantage of through distribution. Again, we look forward to seeing you at another Tech Talk in another later date. Until then, again, thank you for your time. We'll see you next time. Take care.